In this video, I'm going to break down the general structure to a topicality or theory argument in a debate. Let's get into it. Topicality / theory. What is the structure to this? So we said that, like lots of things, there's 4 different types of off-case positions generally taught. There's 4 parts to a DA. Lots of different things in debate come in 4s. Topicality and theory is no exception to that, in that the structure of a topicality or theory argument has 4 different parts to it. So, the first part to the structure of a topicality or a theory argument is what is known as the interpretation. The interpretation. So, the interpretation says what the affirmative or negative, the negative if they're reading topicality, in this instance, thinks what the topic is. So if I had a topic that said Scott should play a sport, pretty similar to the one that we did before break. So if we have a topic that says Scott should play a sport, a topicality argument would interpret one of the arguments in this resolution. So for instance, let's say it would interpret the word sport. So it would, as a part of this interpretation, normally you're going to read a card, probably one piece of evidence, that definitionally tries to support what this thing means. It defines this word. So the definition of a sport could be, a competitive activity where it's something that you have to exercise against someone. I have no idea, right? It would be some type of definition that defines what a sport is, right? On past topics that we've had, we already previously talked about that on the lethal autonomous weapons topic, you could define that as killer robots or as being autonomous, and that would exclude things like drones that are operated by a human rather than by the robot autonomously itself. So the interpretation is going to be you defining what this is. You defining something in here. It could be anything. You could define the word Scott. You could say Scott is a 32-year-old dude. Like, list off a bunch of crap about me. That would be a definition about who and what Scott is. The violation is the second part. The violation is the second part. Normally, the violation, as it kind of says, is going to say the thing that the affirmative has advocated for in the debate does not fall within or under how you have defined the topic. So, let's say I defined a sport as something that needs physical exercise where you exert your body or something like that. I don't know. If I had an affirmative on this topic that said Scott should play chess, chess probably does not definitionally meet the burden of being a sport underneath that interpretation. So a violation would say, in that instance, Scott playing chess is not a sport, or playing chess does not constitute a physical exercise or activity. So that would be the violation component of a topicality argument or a theory argument. Now, some people are going to have different parts, call these things different things. You might read a theory argument that has a violation and not an interpretation. You're probably doing it wrong if you're doing that. But these are all different structures that generally make up a topicality argument and a theory argument. The third part of the structure is going to be I've always called it standards because that's how I was taught it. in policy debate. Some people call this like reasons to prefer. And after we have this like little structure chat, we're going to have a whole chat just about the standards and the reasons to prefer. Like, that's going to be a whole separate topic. So if this part doesn't compute to you right now, hold on a second and wait until we get to that component, because there's like a bajillion different things that you could say. Probably not. There's probably like 15. But there's some different things that you can say that you have to be prepared to say here. Basically, your standards or reasons to prefer are going to be reasons why the interpretation or violation that you have created is better for debate, and makes it so that you are able to actually have a functional debate. So, let's say you wanted to read the artificial intelligence DA on the lethal autonomous weapons topic, right? If the affirmative read a drones affirmative, and when you said the AI DA, they said, no link, we're a drone, we're operated by a human, we're not artificial intelligence, right? You might be like, come on, that's crap. I need to be able to, if I can't say my AI DA against every affirmative on the topic, and you're saying we're not artificial intelligence, we're not autonomous, so therefore we don't link, I think that I should be able to get to read an argument that's like, hey, because you're no linking arguments like that, that's unfair for us in the debate. You're not following the topic, and you should lose the debate. So the example that we just gave would be the negative in the debate losing ground, right? They have positions. They're losing the ground to say those positions in the debate. Another example another example standard would be limits. So we could probably come up with right now 100 different sports, right? We could search the internet. We could come up with all sorts of different sports from all over the world, right? Lots of people play soccer internationally. Lots of people play basketball internationally, but lots of regions have their own particular sports too. Think, I'm from Baltimore. Think about lacrosse. That's a very US and Canada based sport. And there's lots of places that have sports like that. So we could probably come up with a bunch of different sports, but, we're probably talking like 100, 150 sports. If I include chess as a sport, now we're talking like thousands of different sports that could potentially exist. Because if chess is a sport, legit any game could be a sport now. So now like Magic the Card Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon cards, whatever, all of that's a sport. Every video game ever is a sport. So just like imagine the like Twitch category games list right now for how many different games there are. There's an esport for all of those things. I don't know if Mayo is a sport, but I mean, competitive eating, is that a sport? That might actually be a sport. But again, limits would be an argument saying, because of their view or interpretation of different parts of the topic, they make it so there's just too many affirmatives for the negative to have to go against. Remember, we were talking about planned affirmatives, and that reading a plan makes it harder to be negative because the affirmative can defend a specific instance. Then the topicality is probably a check in the planned form of debate that you have against people getting to the fringes of the topic and being able to make it so that there's a lot more affirmatives that people could say in the debate. So limits is an argument that says, hey, we should only have to prepare. There should only be a certain number of affirmatives on the topic. And you make it so that there's way too many affirmatives on the topic. Or the affirmative might answer this argument and say, hey, you make it so there's only two affirmatives on the topic, right? So imagine if we defined a sport as a contact sport. There would be so many different sports that would be disqualified under not being a contact sport. Like, I'm pretty sure baseball, it could be like, oh, Scott, they run into each other on the base path. But like, I'm pretty confident in saying baseball is a non-contact sport because you really don't like collide with other people. Like basketball for sure, football definitely, but you could have different interpretations of that even. So that's kind of what a topicality argument does, and theory is going to serve a similar structure in that it's going to say, hey, the negative interpretation, the negative ought not read planned inclusive counterplans in the debate. Violation, the negative read a planned inclusive counterplan. That's bad because it steals all of my affirmative, which hurts my ground in the debate, and they should lose the debate. So again, the same thing that we've been talking about for the structure of what a topicality argument is, it's very similar to theory. We'll get into like all the different things you can make. The standards change a little bit, your interpretation changes, but we'll get into all that stuff. The fourth part that I erased, is what I would call the voters. The voters are bigger in LD than they are in policy. In policy, legit, you would just say topicality is a voter for fairness and education, and then you move on and nobody really thinks about it. LD, you say a little bit more, but you have to think about why is an argument like topicality or something that says something that you have done has made the debate really competitively too unfair for one side or the other. It's going to talk about, is the debate fair and is it educational, right? If we came to talk about lethal autonomous weapons and you're talking about things that are like legit operated by like a human on a joystick, that's probably not something that we should be gaining education about on this topic. That's not something that we should be learning about. So the voter component of a topicality or theory argument says that this thing that you have said should be a reason that the judge should sign their ballot for you in the debate, because if not, the debate that you have just had is too unfair for you, or that the education gained from that debate is not education that should be a part of the topic or area or thing that you are discussing, right? So for instance, in our picks example here, it hurts our education if they steal our affirmative because we don't really have anything to say against that. We don't really gain any education by debating against ourselves. So this is the structure of topicality and theory arguments, sort of like in a condensed little version. Does anybody have any general questions about this? Have you seen this before? Lay it on me.